Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Peggy Schaedler. Peggy was a school librarian before becoming a writer. She writes stories, plays, and poetry for children. And she's also the author of the children's mystery series, Dagger and Dash, and her newest children's book, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is called Pumpkintown, The Great Goose Getaway. She loves fun books that make children smile. And when she's not writing, she's performing in a variety of other activities, which we'll get into as we go further into the podcast. Right now, I just want to welcome Peggy Schaedler to the Success Insight podcast. Hello.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. So, Peggy, I have to admit, you are probably going on maybe at the number 10 or 11 children's book author on the Success Insight podcast. So thank you for that. And I have to admit, I had not expected to have so many children's book authors, and I think I'm building a niche here, and it's actually a really fun niche. I also noticed that a lot of our book authors are former librarians. And so how did you go from becoming a school librarian to becoming a writer?
Well, I began my career as a high school English teacher, and then I ended up taking a position as a school librarian. And I had a little bit of an interesting history as a teacher. I'm one of the few teachers who actually taught every single grade level from kindergarten through grade 12. And so at that time, I literally went from teaching seniors in high school to kindergartners. In fact, I used to joke around and say I went from teaching Shakespeare to Seuss, meaning in one week, I was teaching Hamlet, and then I was teaching Green Eggs and Ham. So it was a pretty amazing experience. And just when I thought I was surrounded by the best books like Hemingway and Dickens and all the classics, Harper Lee, I soon realized when I became an elementary school librarian that some of the most beautiful, smart, brilliant books are picture books. And I knew at that time that I really wanted to try writing one.
Fantastic. And how did you set out to accomplish this goal of writing a picture book?
Well, being a school librarian gave me the opportunity to read literally hundreds of children's books, meaning middle grade and also picture books. So I was familiar with the genre, and I decided that I needed to do a lot of research because I know a lot of people think that writing a picture book in particular is really easy. I mean, how could it be hard? It's only 32 pages or 40 pages or something like that.
Right.
But it's actually really, really hard. And it took me a very long time. And because I think that when you write for children, there's a huge responsibility. So it does take a lot of research. It's a big responsibility, mainly because you want to provide children with quality literature. You don't want to give them something that's mediocre. I mean, you wouldn't feed your child food that's not the best. And I don't think you would want children to be on a diet of literature that's just fair. So I knew that whatever I wrote had to be something really special. And also you hope that children would learn from your book, have fun with it, but it would also be a learning experience. And I think also, and I used to tell boys and girls in my class this, that whenever I read a book myself, it changes me in some way. Maybe I have a new perspective, or maybe I'm thinking about the world differently in some way. And so as a writer, and as a writer for children, you want the boys and girls to also have that experience. So, wow. So all of that packaged up into one task, and it was really hard.
And when you were doing the research of the other books, what were you discovering about them as a preparatory step for embarking on your journey? What were you finding about that?
Well, I was finding, most importantly, what children like and what they don't like. You know, this is the funniest thing, that children are very picky and very knowledgeable about books, and they're very selective. You can't just give them anything. And as a librarian, and I know all the librarians out there, if you're listening, you'll get it. Children would come in and you would ask them, what type of book are you interested in? They would be very specific, most of them. Some of them would be very much risk takers and say, hey, I'll try anything. And that's the best scenario. But they're very knowledgeable. And so I spent a lot of time talking to children, talking to boys and girls, asking them what they like to read about, and reading at the story chair, of course. I would know books that really made them laugh out loud. I really enjoy funny books myself. I really think that working with children, you have to have a great sense of humor. And so all my favorite books were funny ones. So I knew that I wanted to write something funny. And then I started studying, okay, well, what makes children laugh? What do they think is funny? I had to kind of get into their heads and get into their world. What interests them? And so I studied a lot about that, but also I had to learn a lot about language and vocabulary level, because what you might write for a first grader is not what you might write for a sixth grader, of course. So I studied language, studied so many things, patterns. One of the most interesting things that I learned in writing Pumpkintown was the relationship between the story and the illustrations. And of course, in a picture book, it's 50-50. You have to have a really great story, but you also have to have illustrations, because both of those things tell the story.
Fantastic. And I appreciate going in depth about that. And that's the other thing I'm discovering in this podcast is the complexity of the writing. And as you've just corroborated, writing a children's book with illustration is no small feat at all. It takes work. A lot of thought goes into it. Now, the book, and I do want to get into Pumpkintown in a little more detail. Does the book or the books you were seeing, do they include rhymes or riddles, jokes, music? What was popular, and what did you include within Pumpkintown?
Well, Pumpkintown is not a rhyming book. It's regular text. But I will say that I think one unique thing about Pumpkintown and the language is the characters use a lot of old-timey expressions. I grew up in a household with parents who used all these funny expressions all the time. And one of my favorite stories to tell about that is my mother especially used a lot of fun expressions. Instead of saying, I'm going downtown, for example, she would say, I'm going over street, or lots of other things. But one of the things she would always say is, if she's making tea, I'm putting water over to boil. So one time my friend called me up and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm putting water over to boil. And she said, well, what are you putting it over? A fire? She said, no. And I didn't even realize I was using that expression. And there's a lot of them. I'm sure if anybody who's listening can think of a lot of things your parents used to say that were really, really funny.
Sure.
These characters are very old-timey. They live in an old-time village. And so some of the expressions they use are really fun and funny. And I think kids would enjoy them. And even if they don't understand something, I'm sure the adults or the grandparents in their lives would have a lot of fun explaining them. So, for example, one of the characters says that Sassy the goose, one of the characters in the book is a goose named Sassy. And he says, that's Sassy. She sure is a card. And he says, a card? So, it's just some fun things like that. Or one of the lines in the book is the postmaster says, oh, what a kerfuffle. So just some fun language like that. I think kids are very bright, and I think they love language and they love thinking about it. And I think every child would say, Mom or Nana, what's a kerfuffle? Or what does that mean? She's a hot ticket or something like that.
Oh, very cool. I was actually thinking, I wonder if there's a glossary in the back of the book with the definitions. We just did a podcast with a gentleman. He is an author of, I would say it's preteen, kind of a paranormal mystery.
Oh, cool.
Very cool. The Mystery of Hawthorne House. Very good book. The book cover was amazing. And part of the characters in the book spoke a very much Northeast Maine, and the way the use of, and so he would actually, whenever those characters in the book spoke, he was writing the language as though they were speaking it, not turning it into language like you and I are chatting right now, which I thought was interesting. And so I think it's fascinating to really customize the book around, the uniqueness in the language and whether you had a glossary or not, but it prompts the child to ask his parents or siblings or grandparents, hey, what does that mean? And that's part of the education and the enlightenment, I suppose, of sitting down.
Yeah, I think so. And going along with that, I actually did not include a glossary. I guess I could have, but I think that I really like books that parents and children can read together, or grandparents or other family
Right.
members. If I imagined them reading this book, the best case scenario would be for me is the child turning to a parent and them both talking back and forth about the story and thinking about it and thinking about that language. And so if the glossary was in the back, yes, a child could turn to the back and read it himself or herself. But I read, I think it was Madeline L'Engle who wrote a quote and something to the effect of that when authors write a children's book, they're writing it as much for their parents as they are for the child. And I think that's really true. And so I guess I'm hoping that they talk together about the language.
Part of the uniqueness about your work is it's your work, and your hope is that the child is consuming it with the parents. The parents are engaging with the child, not just running through the paces like my sister would just be reading the book just to get through the book. I'm making this up. If my sister ever heard what I just said, I would be up a creek.
You'd be up. Hey, there's an expression, up the creek without a paddle.
There's an expression we both understand, but I can imagine, like the babysitter. Oh, I got to read little Howie a book, and just to get through it. But the fact is, I mean, what you've just said, I think is very special. Is the child's going to enjoy the book if he or she has questions, and it's engaging with the parents, and they get to then say, "Well, I don't know," or this is what it is, and this is just like this, or your grandma says this, your grandpa says it, and cousins say it. And I think that's wonderful. There's a question I'd had, because I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure, but I want the audience to understand what it is. When you were talking about in the library, you said the story chair. What is a story chair?
Well, I was an elementary school librarian, and I worked in a school that was K through 6.
Right.
And we had it was a lovely, charming little library, I have to tell you. And I was very lucky. It was a dream job, really. I was very lucky to have that position. And in the back of the library, there was a beautiful chair, and I called it the story chair. I think most librarians do. And the children, mostly the younger grades, but not necessarily, because believe it or not, 6th graders loved being read to. But anyway, they were just a little big to fit around the story chair. But the children came over and sat around the story chair, and I would read them a book. And sometimes the book would relate to what the teacher might be doing in class, or curriculum related, or something that I was teaching in the library or whatever, or sometimes just for fun, because I do believe that sometimes reading can be just for fun, that there doesn't have to be, I don't know, a follow-up test or something like that to it, or
sure,
whatever. And so anyway, but yeah, the story chair is the most amazing thing in the world. And I would always say to the kids, okay, today I'm going to read you one of my favorite books. And I must have said that all the time, every time I took a book out, because they would always say, Mrs. Schaedler, or you said that last week about the book you read. And I said, I know, I can't help it. I have so many favorite books.
Fantastic. I wonder if the story chair is still there.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yes. I just retired 2 years ago. So I retired early, not because I was unhappy as a librarian or anything like that. There were just lots of things going on that I wanted to do and goals I wanted to reach. But yes, the story chair is still lovely. And the librarian who is there now is also wonderful and all good.
All right. So Peggy, as a consultant and a coach, I have a task for you. I want you to go back to that library and have a picture of yourself in that story chair.
Oh, I would love to do that.
I think you should do that. I actually think you've got the website, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. You're so comfortable around libraries. And when we put the show notes up and create the podcast and publish it out to the masses, we're going to put keywords in there. And one of those items could very well be story chairs, and one of the challenges you could put out there is take a picture of you with your favorite book at the story chair, or better yet, have a copy of Pumpkintown at your story chair. And it's like, oh my God, that would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful. And I have to thank you for actually asking me about that, because being at the experiences I had at the Story Chair were magical. I know all the librarians out there would agree with me. And if you don't mind, could I tell you a quick Story Chair story that's really funny?
I would love you to do that.
So, and this kind of has to do with my book. So when I started writing Pumpkintown, I haven't talked about this yet, but Pumpkintown, and bear with me, audience, is about the little village of Pumpkinhead people. And I'll explain more about that later. But when I started writing it, I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how can I ever write a book that kids will like about Pumpkinhead people? It sounds so outrageous. But then I remembered something that happened to me at the Story Chair. It was, I used to use a lot of puppets too at the Story Chair, especially with the younger children, to keep them engaged. And I had this one little puppet, a little cat puppet named Rum Tum. And Rum Tum would come out, and Rum Tum didn't talk. He would just whisper in my ear, and I would tell the boys and girls what Rum Tum was saying. So one day, this little girl at the Story Chair said, oh, I think I hear him purring. And a couple other kids said, we hear him purring too. And it was so adorable. And now the thing of it is, did they know Rum Tum was just a puppet? Yes, they absolutely did. There was no question. They knew Rum Tum was a puppet. But there's something in the English classroom, and this children's author, Mac Barnett, actually talks about it in a TED Talk that he did. But he talks about how children have this incredible sense of wonder. And in the English classroom, and he talks about it too, the willing suspension of disbelief. And what that means is having the ability to suspend what you know to be true for the sake of enjoyment. And kids are great at that. And so, yes, they knew Rum Tum was a puppet, but they were able to just believe for that moment and enjoy it. And so when I was writing Pumpkintown and doubting myself and thinking, oh my gosh, how can I ever write this book? How can they ever read about Pumpkinhead people? Well, I remembered that little cat puppet, and you know what? They were right with me on that. And so I decided to give it a go.
Fantastic. And suspending disbelief for the purpose of helping you accomplish your goal. Because part of the questioning our path forward or our approach, those limiting beliefs as adults, we learn those for a variety of reasons. And kids just don't have those limiting beliefs. And so they're able, like you say, to suspend those. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a cool thing. One really great experience that has come out of writing the book for me is I've been invited to talk about writing and speak about writing to not only in schools, but also adults. So when I do that, I talk about writing, but there's a lot of writers who go out and do talks about writing. So I want to do something a little different. And so when I was learning about your podcast and what it was all about, I thought about my program that I do for adults. And so I decided to just talk about how to keep going and how to reach your goals and how to stay creative. That has been a really cool experience for me, because there's something that someone told me once, and this teacher said, you know what, teachers can never become writers because of the English teacher's curse. I don't know, have you ever heard of that, the English teacher's curse?
No, but I think I get it.
It's where, you're surrounded and you teach the classics and the greats all day long. And so when an English teacher finally sits down to write anything of her own, they constantly compare themselves to the greats, and they can't write anything because it sounds terrible. There are a lot of greats. There are a lot of great writers, but that doesn't mean you can write something that's original too, and you can write something that's great too, and in a different way. And anyway, so I did. I shook off the curse. Yeah.
Very, very good. One of the questions I will typically ask in the podcast, and I think it's pretty interesting, you've actually just kind of shared it out of just the natural flow of the conversation, is, what are you doing now that you've written the book? Maybe you're planning book number 2 or 3. However, you're going out there and you're speaking and teaching and presenting to others. And because one of our questions typically is, what's next for you? And also, what are you learning about yourself now? I mean, because you're an accomplished author. I mean, you've written plays and stories, poetry. You've got the children's mystery series, Dagger and Dash, and now you've got this children's book. In addition to wanting to teach and share about your journey as an author, what else are you learning about that process, and then perhaps about yourself?
Well, I think that there's been so many great experiences that have come out of writing Pumpkintown. And it has not been counting how many books I sold or anything like that. It's been working with people and meeting people. And I've been very lucky because when I've had book signings or when I've done talks or I've been invited to go to group talks and stuff like that, I've met some wonderful people who've shared their goals and have asked me questions and have shared their experiences. And that's been so great. That's been the best thing for me. And my best thing is going into schools. I'll talk about that later, but talking to adults. And like I said, I've been trying to focus more on helping people stay motivated in whatever they do and whatever creative art they have. And I think people are really interested in that. And I know I was. So now I've started to read a million books about staying motivated and how to help the creative process. One author I want to throw out there, by the way, is Austin Kleon. His first book was Steal Like an Artist. And if you are a writer, or actually if you're a creator of anything, it doesn't even matter what, I mean, you have to get this book because it's amazing. And he was really inspiring to me because he writes a lot about how to reach your goals, not just writing about any goal in life. So I feel like that's my way. I want to give back, not only just with my books for children, but I want to help people if they want to become writers or with anything in their lives, or if they're feeling down. Or I think especially with writing, it's really hard. And some days you wake up and you're thinking, oh my gosh, you read the page that you wrote the day before and you think, oh my gosh, that sounds so stupid. Why am I doing this? So it's really hard to get beyond that. And so that's what I've tried to focus on, and also going in schools and working with children and helping to make them happy.
Fantastic. And what we'll do in the show notes is we'll find the link to Austin Kleon in this book. So we'll share that as well. Let's talk a little bit about Pumpkintown now. And I would love if you would gift us and the audience with perhaps a short reading from it. But what's the premise around Pumpkintown?
Just to give you really briefly, Pumpkintown, what inspired me is an actual place called Pumpkintown, an actual local attraction in Connecticut. And it is a seasonal little old-timey village with pumpkinhead people. They're not scary. They're not jack-o'-lanterns. The pumpkinheads are charming and sweet and beautiful. And these little people live in this town. There's a bank. There's a general store. There's a post office. They actually live in a community. And you can visit there, of course. This is a seasonal place. It's in autumn around Halloween, but September and October. And so I used to go there just myself, even as an adult, and walk around. And I love the vibe of this little place because it really was a neighborhood of people and a community. And I thought it was begging for a story. So then that inspired me to write it. So this book, Pumpkintown, this is the first one. It's called The Great Goose Getaway, is about this community of pumpkinhead people. The main character is a little boy named Neddington Patch like pumpkin patch, of course. And his personality is he gets distracted really easily. So in this particular book, he's really excited because he's entering his pet goose, Sassy, in a pet parade, the Pumpkintown Pet Parade. But by accident, he leaves the pen open and Sassy escapes. And he turns to his community members and his friends for help. And so they team up together to help him find Sassy. And of course, the question is, will he find her before the pet parade? And how's that going to work out? So it's a story that has a strong sense of community and a neighborhood. And that's, I would say that is the premise of this story.
Okay, very good. I would love if you would share with us maybe a passage from the book just to give our listeners just a sense of what they have to look forward to when they invest to get a copy of the book. And hey, we're in December, so perfect timing actually for the holidays. Yeah, if you could share something with us, I would love that.
Oh my gosh, I would love to. I did want to say, by the way, that Pumpkintown, I mean, I know here we are talking about Pumpkintown and it's the holiday season, right? Wintertime. But this book is not about Halloween. When I was the librarian, I was always looking for books, especially in the fall, that were not Halloween-y. And so I didn't want it to be about Halloween, even though it's, of course, about pumpkinhead people. But this book can be read at any time of year. It's not necessarily about fall. I know a lot of people think, oh, pumpkins fall. Why would I read it in Christmas? But anyway, Just I throw that out there.
Fair enough.
Let me read a little bit to you. So it starts off like this. The sun rises over Pumpkintown. Neddington Patch leaps out of bed. He is excited. Today is the pet parade. He hopes his goose Sassy will win the costume contest. Ned is dressing Sassy up as Squash Gordon, his favorite superhero. He spent days making her costume. Time to get dressed, Sassy, Ned calls. Uh-oh, he's forgotten something. Something important. Did he sew Sassy's cape? Yep. Did he glue her mask? Yep. Did he give her a bath? Definitely. What could it be? The goose pen! The night before, Ned had been practicing his superhero moves. Bam, pow, take that, evil alien. His mother interrupted. Ned, don't forget to lock the pen. You know how Sassy likes to wander. Mommo, he growled, I'm not Ned. I'm Squash Gordon. Well, Squash, after you've saved the universe, please lock up. She handed Ned a key, and then she added, look out, the aliens are right behind you. But Ned had forgotten, and now the door swings open. Sassy, Ned shouts, where are you? And that's where I'll stop.
All right. Fantastic. And I'm excited. I feel like I want to sit around the story chair and hear the book being read. I mean, how cool is that? How cool is that? Now, I noticed in the on the Amazon page where the book is located in the series Pumpkintown, in parentheses, book 1. Typically, when you see that, it doesn't take a lot of intuition to know there's going to be a book 2 and beyond. And the fact that you've just authored the book, it's so new. Can you share just a little bit about where you see the series going?
Yes, actually, book 2 is finished. Right now, it's in the editing stage. So I was actually working on it today, as a matter of fact, also to get me psyched up for the podcast. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. I've written 3 other stories. So I'm hoping that if all goes according to plan, book 2 will be out at the end of the summer, 2020. I also, if you don't mind, I want to take a quick second to talk about the illustrations of the book.
Love it.
I was very lucky to work with an amazing illustrator whose name is Sarah Rawson-Frith. And I met her at a writer's conference, actually, and I pitched the idea of Pumpkintown nervously because, again, it's really hard to explain Pumpkinhead people. And she is so wonderful. She was totally on board with it. But it was very difficult for she and I because Sarah had never been to the real Pumpkintown. Even though I had sent her a lot of pictures and everything, it was a hard concept because I didn't want these Pumpkinhead people to be scary. I didn't want jack-o'-lanterns. I didn't want anything like that. I actually wanted illustrations to be soft and sweet and adorable because I had read a lot of books in the library and they were always an illustration style that I loved. I knew I didn't want cartoony. I didn't want digital illustrations or anything like that. So she actually paints in watercolors, and each illustration in the book is meticulously hand painted. And she uses a really unique technique, which gives the watercolor illustrations texture, which is great, of course, for a pumpkin. And I just needed to throw that out there because I believe she's brilliant. And for those of you who are imagining what Pumpkintown might look like, imagine that beauty and softness of watercolor, but also vibrant color. So it just came, I was really excited about it. And she is definitely on board, of course, for the other Pumpkintown books in the series.
Fantastic. We'd love to include Sarah as part of the show notes. So we'll get the correct spelling of her name. And if she has a web page or where she's showing her work, we'd love to give her a shout out in the show notes as well. Peggy, before we say it's a wrap, a couple things I'm curious about. First is you're involved in a kind of an activity called Puppets for Peace. And I was wondering if you could, and the fact that you play an instrument, and I'm not going to say what the instrument is because I want you to share it, but I will say I actually have a friend, he's a client of mine. He's actually been on our podcast a couple of times. He actually plays this instrument too. And I feel like I need to introduce the two of you to each other. But in any case, what is Puppets for Peace?
Well, when I left the classroom, the library was my classroom. When I left, I wanted to continue to work with children. And I loved reading stories and I loved working with puppets. And my third love, the instrument that I play, is the ukulele, which is just a lovely, happy, wonderful instrument. I decided that I would try to create a school program where I could go into schools, do a little story time, play and sing with the children, do a little puppet play, and promote kindness and happiness. I have done that. I've gone into several schools so far, and it's been so incredible and amazing. And I've had the opportunity to sing and play, and they are so into it and they love it. And I feel like it's my way of bringing happiness into their lives and making school wonderful and reading wonderful. And it's just been great.
Really appreciate you sharing that. I was having a conversation with a coaching colleague of mine yesterday. We were actually chatting about the podcast, and I think your episode probably is going to be either the high 70s or in the low 80s of podcasts this year. It's been totally amazing. But we were talking about the overarching theme of the podcast, as we call it, Success Insight. And he had raised this idea of second acts, so to speak. And what I really love about your story is your story in a way is like, this is your second act. I mean, you have been a teacher and librarian. Maybe we'll combine those as maybe act 1A, and one in the librarian piece is 1B, but now an accomplished author and a performer with Puppets for Peace. So you've got a pretty vibrant act 2 going on, as I have to say.
I do. And when I retired, I did take some time for sure to just decompress, but I was really sad. I have to tell you, in September when the school buses rolled by, I was sad. And I realized that I could not sit here. I mean, I could be a writer full time. Great. That was great. I was doing that, but I needed to be with children. That was my thing. And I feel like that's what my passion is. And that's what makes me happy too. So then I'm thinking, well, I've got all these puppets and I have these books. And then when I retired, I began playing the ukulele, and actually I do play for a group that volunteers in assisted living facilities. We play for nursing homes and stuff like that. And that's been phenomenal experience too. That's another add-on, but I knew I wanted to play for children. So I practiced because the ukulele is pretty simple to play, but it does take a lot of practice. So I did that. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I think in my retirement, you have to do things that make you happy. And that's how you stay healthy in mind, body, and soul, as they say, I guess, right? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Another thought that's going through my head is we've had, Dan Pegram is a guest on the podcast. His children's book with illustrations we published it maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Anne-Marie Hannon, we just published last week. So we're going to have, around 8 or 10 children's book authors. And I think it would be really kind of cool to figure out a way to bring you all together onto a podcast just to talk about each of your journeys. We'll have to figure out how to make that happen. But in any case...
Yeah, I think that would be great, by the way. Yeah.
Those are the things that are going through my head as I'm having a conversation. I'm listening, I'm actively listening, but these ideas, there's like this little light bulb above my head going pop, pop, pop. And so that's the one thing. And as I said, I have a colleague, a friend, client who also plays the ukulele as well. So listen, I really appreciate, Peggy, you taking the time out of your day to come onto the podcast and talk about your journey, your second act, so to speak, and about the books and the process of writing and actually sharing a little bit about Pumpkintown, the Great Goose Getaway, and doing some reading from the book. If our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where's the best places for them to go?
Well, my main website is called turtlehillbooks.com. If you go there and you want to write me or leave me a message or communicate with me, I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in a school program or anything like that, you're welcome to leave me a message at puppetsforpeace.net. It's not .com, it's .net, and it's puppets4 with a number 4, Puppets for Peace. And also I have a Facebook page. My Facebook page is called Pumpkintown Books, and you can communicate with me there too. And I hope that anyone out there who's thinking about writing does decide to just do it, and don't be afraid, because it's awesome.
Fantastic. Well, Peggy, thank you again for being on the show, and we're going to most definitely provide all those links that you've just shared with us. And I mean, it's been very enlightening, and I have to say, I really do enjoy these discussions about the authors, and we've got so many of them on the podcast. and about the children's books and the library, so to speak. I do call it a library of podcasts where we're devoting that includes children's book authors. And I think it's been an incredible realization or insight. So there's the name of my podcast, Success Insight.
Mm-hmm.
To really, wow, we're getting a lot of children's book authors. So it's been fun. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Howard. It was my pleasure.
There you have it, folks. We have been chatting with Peggy Schaedler on the Success Insight podcast. Peggy is a former librarian turned children's book author, and we talked a lot about the writing process and the work and her love of just being around kids. And I'm actually pretty impressed about the story chair, because I want to talk to Peggy about that afterwards, because I think it'd be kind of cool to see other librarians sitting in their favorite story chair reading their favorite book, and kudos to them if it's Pumpkintown, the Great Goose Getaway that they're reading. So listen, folks, we're going to put the backlinks to turtlehillbooks.com, Puppets for Peace, Peggy's Facebook page, and we'll also put the author page from Amazon, so you can go out to the Amazon site to pick up a copy of Pumpkintown. And as I say, every episode, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And the other kind of inspiration or insight today is this idea of the second act. What is your second act? And one of the things we're learning from our podcast is so many of our authors, when they sit down to start writing, it is their second act and then some. And so we're really curious about what your second act is. And send us an email. Go visit successinsightpodcast.com, fill out the form, let us know what your second act is. And hey, maybe we'll even have you as a guest on the podcast as well. So that's it, everybody. Go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.